The morning air over eastern England was crisp and biting, carrying the faint tang of engine oil, gun grease, and wet earth. Across the sprawling airfields of Norfolk and Suffolk, the US 8th Air Force prepared for one of the most daring daylight raids in history. On the tarmac, rows upon rows of B-17 flying. Fortresses rested like steel giants, their polished fuselages catching the first rays of sunlight. Ground crews moved with mechanical precision, checking engines, securing bomb racks, and passing along whispered words of luck or prayer to the young men who would fly these massive aircraft into the heart of Nazi Germany. This mission was audacious, bordering on reckless. Intelligence had pinpointed two critical targets: the Messerschmitt aircraft factories in Regensburg, where Germany produced its premier fighter planes, and the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, the linchpin of the Reich's war machine. Destroy both, and the Luftwaffe's future could be in peril, fail, and hundreds of men would not return. In briefing rooms across the airfields, squadron commanders spread maps across tables, tracing the long route the bombers would take. Captain Robert Kelleher of the 100th Bomb Group leaned over the paper, pointing to the path across the Channel, France, and into southern Germany. "We'll climb to 25,000 feet, he explained, voice steady but edged with tension. "Our fighters will escort us as far as we can go, but after that, it's just us, boys. Watch your formation. Don't break. Don't hesitate. Every second counts." The men listened in silence, the weight of what lay ahead pressing on them. Many had flown missions before, but this was different. Deep into enemy territory, in broad daylight, unescorted for hundreds of miles. The Luftwaffe would be waiting, and they would strike without mercy. By 7 a.m., engines roared to life across the airfields. The deep growl of the radial engines vibrated the ground. Bombers began taxiing into position, their steel wings glinting in the morning sun. Crewmen climbed aboard, strapped into cockpits and gun turrets, securing helmets, goggles, and oxygen masks. Some carried photographs of loved ones, letters hastily written the night before, or small trinkets for luck. Inside the cockpit of B-17 Liberty Bell, pilot Lieutenant John Richardson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had flown over France, over the Channel, even through flak over occupied territories, but this mission felt different. He glanced at his co-pilot, who was quietly checking instruments, then at the navigator, who traced their route with trembling fingers. Silence hung heavy in the cabin, broken only by the hiss of oxygen masks and the growl of engines. At 7:15 a.m., the first bombers began rolling down the runway. Like a mechanical river, the fortresses lifted into the sky, one by one, climbing toward the grey-blue horizon. The airfield quickly emptied as more and more aircraft joined the formation, their propellers churning the morning air into turbulence that rattled the hangars they had left behind. Far to the east, across France, German radar operators at Jagdgeschwader 26 and JG2 watched the approaching specks on their screens. Bells rang, telephones clattered, and frantic voices called through switchboards. At Woensdrecht Airfield, Major Josef Priller, veteran ace of the Luftwaffe, barked orders to his waiting pilots. "All Gruppen scramble immediately. Intercept at 25,000 feet. Target, bomber stream, heading southeast." Mechanics ran to release wheel chocks. FW-190s rumbled alive, the BMW 801 engines spitting flames and smoke as propellers began spinning. Pilots climbed into cockpits, strapping themselves in tightly. The scent of hot oil, gunpowder, and leather filled the cabin. Weapon systems were checked, radios tuned, and the pilots prepared themselves for the encounter that would define the day. By 8 a.m., the bomber stream had reached the Channel. Below, the waters sparkled deceptively calm, but above them, the tension was tangible. The Americans were flying into the jaws of an eagle, unseen, patient, deadly. The Luftwaffe pilots, rising from their airfields, could already see the distant glint of silver fuselages. To them, this was home defense. To the Americans, it was a mission that could end in glory or annihilation. In the clouds above the English coast, the first whispers of battle began. The clash of steel and courage, of fear and duty. Neither side fully understood what the day would demand of them, nor the losses that would be carved into the sky that August morning. And so, the stage was set. Hundreds of men, thousands of bullets, and dozens of Fw-190s were on a collision course, destined to etch August 17, 1943, into history as one of the bloodiest days of the air war in Europe. By mid-morning, the bomber stream had stretched across the sky like a silver ribbon, thousands of pounds of explosives hurtling toward the heart of Germany. Inside the B-17s, the men were tense, nerves stretched tight. Frost covered the windshields and gun turrets. Oxygen masks hissed with every breath, and the constant drone of 4 engine bombers blended into an eerie symphony of machinery. Every man knew the stakes. The Messerschmitt factories at Regensburg and the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt were critical, and the Luftwaffe would defend them with every ounce of firepower they had. Radio chatter crackled with updates. Bandits, 12 o'clock high, came the warning. From the sun above, dark specks appeared. The Fw-190s of JG-26 and JG-2 were already climbing toward intercept altitude, engines screaming in unison. Major Joseph Priller, leading the German fighters, scanned the distant glint of American bombers. His men were ready, agile, armored, and deadly. The Luftwaffe's strategy was precise: hit the bombers in waves from all directions before they could reach their targets. Inside the lead B-17, Captain Robert Kelleher adjusted his goggles, hands tight on the controls. "Steady, boys," he muttered. "Hold formation. They can't break us if we stick together." Around him, gunners tightened grips on their 50 caliber machine guns, fingers white, eyes scanning every inch of sky. Then it began. The Fw-190s dove in from the sun, a tactic designed to blind the American gunners. Cannons flashed orange and white, tracer rounds streaking across the clouded expanse. One bomber exploded mid-air, wing ripped away in a shower of fire. Parachutes blossomed, tiny white markers against the blue, while another bomber spun helplessly toward the earth. German pilots attacked with brutal efficiency. Lieutenant Heinz Orlowski, flying his Fw-190, later recalled the moment. We could see them, every man in their cockpit, tight in formation. They were brave, too brave. We fired. They held. Again and again we struck. The sky burned with fire and smoke. The Americans retaliated fiercely. Machine guns rattled from nose to tail, from top and belly turrets. One Fw-190 burst into flames after a direct hit from a tail gunner, pieces spinning toward the clouds. Another pilot bailed out, parachute opening like a blossom of white amid the carnage. Amid the chaos, acts of courage emerged. Sergeant Joseph Bayani, manning the top turret of a B-17 in the Schweinfurt group, fired relentlessly, scoring hits on attackers while his bomber shuddered from impacts. Beside him, a young tail gunner replaced a jammed belt mid-flight, fingers numb, hands trembling, determination overriding fear. The sky over northern France had become a war zone, a ballet of death where speed, strategy, and survival intertwined. Fw-190s swooped in, weaving between bombers, firing head-on or from above. the American formation split and reformed, sometimes too slowly, leaving openings for German pilots to exploit. By 11 a.m., the first wave of bombers approached Regensburg, the German industrial city rising in the distance. Smoke from earlier attacks marked their path, and below, flak batteries waited. The Luftwaffe was relentless, and the survivors of the initial attacks were already battered. Yet, determination held. Every bomber pushed on, every crewman gripping his weapon, every pilot guiding his fortress closer to the target, knowing the fate of the mission rested on their courage and discipline. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, regrouped. Fw 190 pilots pulled back, rearmed, and prepared for the next wave. Their orders clear: stop the bombers from reaching Schweinfurt at all costs. The battle above the clouds had only begun. Hundreds of men, dozens of Fw 190s, and thousands of rounds of ammunition would clash in the coming hours, writing one of the deadliest air battles of World War II into the history books. By late morning, the first waves of B-17 flying fortresses approached the industrial city of Regensburg, the heart of Germany's aircraft production. Smoke from smaller raids earlier in the morning rose in thin spirals, but the factories still loomed large and menacing. Inside each bomber, crews gripped their controls, checking instruments and scanning the skies. They had survived the initial intercepts over northern France, but the toughest challenge lay ahead. From the skies above Regensburg, the Luftwaffe's Fw 190s and Bf 109s waited patiently. The German pilots had studied the Americans' tactics, anticipating their approach and timing. Major Josef Priller, experienced ace and squadron leader of JG-26, guided his men into position. His orders were precise: hit the bombers hard and fast. Don't give them time to regroup. They must not reach Schweinfurt intact. The first attacks came in waves. Fw 190s dived from above, their radial engines roaring like thunder, guns blazing. Tracer rounds cut through the morning air, tearing into wings, fuselages, and control surfaces. One B-17 hit squarely in the tail, spun violently, and disappeared behind the clouds, a plume of black smoke marking its fall. Another bomber exploded, its nose tearing apart in a fiery bloom visible for miles. Inside the fortresses, the crews fought back with grim determination. Gunners fired from every turret, sometimes jamming or overheating under the relentless fire. The top gunner on one aircraft, Sergeant Beerner, moved between positions to cover gaps left by wounded or fallen crew members. His 50 caliber machine guns spit fire at the incoming Fw 190s, downing one and forcing another to veer away in flames. Below, flak batteries added another layer of danger. Anti-aircraft shells erupted in deadly bursts, sending shrapnel raining down on the bomber stream. The combination of German fighters and flak created a perfect storm, slicing through formations that had once been almost invincible. While Regensburg burned beneath them, the Schweinfurt-bound group continued toward its target. Ball-bearing factories were the lifeblood of the German war machine. If destroyed, they could cripple tanks, aircraft, and vehicles for months. But the Luftwaffe anticipated their approach. Experienced Fw 190 pilots, freshly refueled from earlier sorties, rose to meet them. The Americans encountered head-on attacks, the most terrifying tactic of the day. German pilots aimed directly at the noses of the B-17s, unleashing volleys of 20mm cannon fire. These frontal assaults were devastating. Entire aircraft were shredded, engines exploded, and fuselages ignited. Parachutes blossomed as some crews abandoned doomed bombers, drifting helplessly toward the German countryside below. Amid the carnage, acts of heroism shone. Pilots guided severely damaged bombers through waves of attackers, gunners fired until exhaustion set in, and navigators calculated precise turns to avoid the densest areas of flak and fighter attacks. One B-17, missing a wingtip, still managed to release its bombs on target over Schweinfurt before limping away on a single engine. By early afternoon, the mission's toll became clear. The bomber formations were fragmented, many aircraft badly damaged, and casualties mounting. Yet the men pressed on, driven by duty and the knowledge that the destruction of these factories could shift the war's momentum. The Luftwaffe, while victorious in inflicting losses, had to pull back to regroup. Fuel, ammunition, and pilot stamina limited further immediate attacks. Still, the battle was far from over. The surviving bombers now faced the long, treacherous journey home, carrying the weight of their losses, the smoke of burning factories, and the threat of renewed Luftwaffe attacks. Above all, one truth became painfully clear. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid had become the bloodiest mission yet flown by the 8th Air Force, a clash of courage, strategy, and lethal aerial combat that would be remembered for generations. By mid-afternoon, the surviving B-17 bombers began the long, perilous journey back across Germany and the English Channel. Smoke trails marked the path of the fallen, flaming fortresses spiraling earthward, crews praying for parachutes to open, hoping the cold forests or icy rivers below might save them. Inside the intact aircraft, men were numb, shaken, and exhausted. The Schweinfurt-bound formation, having delivered its bombs, now faced the Luftwaffe's most relentless tactic: intercepting the bombers on the return flight. German Fw-190s, refueled and rearmed, surged into the sky again, engines screaming with deadly intent. These were veterans of countless sorties, flying the agile, heavily armed fighters with ruthless precision. Major Joseph Priller, leading the assault, dove into the bomber stream, weaving through flak bursts and tracer fire with practiced skill. Inside the B-17, Liberty Bell, pilot Lieutenant John Richardson gripped the yoke with frostbitten fingers, sweat chilling as it ran down his back. Around him, the fuselage shuddered from impacts, each shell puncturing armor and ripping through wing spars. Tracer rounds streaked past, cutting trails of death across the sky. One bomber, hit squarely in the wing root, exploded mid-air, scattering debris and sending its crew plunging toward the ground below. Parachutes blossomed like white flowers in a field of smoke and fire. Amid the chaos, acts of heroism were commonplace. Sergeant Joseph Byrne, manning the top turret of a severely damaged bomber, continued firing relentlessly at attacking Fw-190s, downing 2 in quick succession. Pilots navigated crippled aircraft with skill bordering on miraculous, keeping formation despite shredded wings, failing engines, and wounded crew members. The line between life and death was razor thin, but every man pushed on with the single-minded determination to survive. For the German pilots, the mission was equally harrowing. Fw-190s had to dive repeatedly, risk collisions with stragglers, and endure the heavy return fire from desperate gunners. Lieutenant Heinz Orlowski later recalled, "We could see them struggling, smoke pouring from engines, men frozen in turrets. They fought with incredible courage. It was terrifying, and yet it was our duty." One by one, the fortresses limped across the channel. Fuel ran dangerously low. Some aircraft were forced to ditch in the North Sea. Rescue boats plucked survivors from freezing waters, but many were lost, disappearing into the waves. On land, radar stations guided stragglers, but the sky remained a deadly gauntlet. By late afternoon, the first fortresses touched down in England. The airfields were silent, save for the droning of damaged engines winding down. Ground crews counted the returning aircraft. Out of 376 bombers, only 316 had survived. More than 600 men were dead or missing, and dozens more wounded. Many planes were so damaged they would never fly again. Across Germany, the Luftwaffe also tallied its losses. Skilled Fw-190 pilots had been killed or injured, and aircraft lost to flak and defensive fire. While the Germans had inflicted heavy casualties, the factories at Regensburg and Schweinfurt were only partially damaged. They would recover within months, and the war would continue. The mission left a bitter truth for both sides. Courage and duty alone could not guarantee survival. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid had rewritten the rules of strategic bombing. From that day forward, long-range fighter escorts became essential, and American tactics shifted to protect men as fiercely as targets. The mission left a bitter truth for both sides. Courage and duty alone could not guarantee survival. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid had rewritten the rules of strategic bombing. From that day forward, long-range fighter escorts became essential, and American tactics shifted to protect men as fiercely as targets. The legend of the Fw-190, the Butcher Bird, was cemented. Agile, heavily armed, and lethal, it had exacted a brutal toll on the bomber crews. Yet the Americans had shown equal bravery, flying into near-certain death, completing their mission despite staggering losses. August 17, 1943, remained etched in history as a day of fire, courage, and sacrifice. A day when the skies above Europe became a crucible of war, where every man and machine was tested beyond the limits of endurance.